This week on Mark Langley's Horsemanship podcast, we're going to look at float loading or trailer loading, as you might know it, and how we can help horses get on, get off, and stay there comfortably. Hello, welcome to Mark Langley's Horsemanship podcast, a podcast helping people to understand their horses better, to provide solutions in a calm, connected way. Mark, we've got a question this week from one of our members, Lisa, who has a horse who is increasingly getting harder and harder to get on a float. Is that common that you can get a horse on one day, but then a couple of sessions down the track, it's even harder? What's going on with that?
Yeah, very, very common. You know, like you might have your young horse, you taught it to go on and off, and horse is nice and loose and feels beautiful going on and off. And then after 2 or 3 trips, the horse starts to go, I actually think I understand that, and I'm actually quite frightened in there, and I don't want to endure 2 hours of being kind of very frightened, so I don't like that place. Just like people, like people, it'd be like, I call it Hansel and Gretel, like we make it all nice, get them on at home, and then all of a sudden they're travelling in it, and it's not the same nice little kind of safe lolly house that they thought it was.
But it's not black and white, is it? Because they can go on it one time and then they realise, well, that wasn't a particularly nice experience, or the noise scared me, or the movement scared me, or all of it scared me. But the second time they might be a bit more hesitant, but they still actually go on. But it's the third or the fourth time that they really can get quite hard to go on. So it's a progressive change. That's what interests me. It's not a sudden, well, no, I know what that's about.
Yes. No, it is a progressive change, and something I really believe now, like you remember the float, we used to have the big trailer that I could open all the bays and just put the young horses in like loose, like a truck. To me, I did that because, and that's how I like a float, is so if I have a young horse that I've got to take somewhere, I can actually load it in a way that it's got more room and space to make it feel like it's just in a moving stable opposed to in this tight little sort of cell. Sometimes we have to take horses places, but my belief getting stronger each year about floating is you float an educated horse and, in a tight load float, because I've seen too many horses that are young and naive and you've worked on leading and floating, but there's a whole bunch of other foundational areas and things that they've got to start to learn to cope and process that hasn't been done because they haven't been in training that long, and sometimes it's too much for too much for their mind to be travelling floats too often. A lot of young horses that go to shows as yearlings, they do all these yearling classes, taking horses all over the countryside, and some of those horses don't have a lot of foundation, yet they're travelling a lot in a float, and it can really erode their confidence, and some of them can get like post-traumatic stress syndrome sort of thing, very, very worried in float.
Okay, and so does the actual float design, you mentioned that you had a float that was quite open and quite large. Does the design of a float have quite a strong impact on it? How significant is the design that people, and what would you look for to make a float really helpful for a horse?
The two things, so people have, the standard choice in Australia, and it seems to be around the world as well. You've got 3 choices, You've got like a cattle crate, a big cattle crate sort of design that you can let a horse go in, or even if you did have them tied up, there's a lot of space around them to move and feel it's a bit more open. Then you've got your sort of smaller straight load floats that feel a little bit more confined, and your standard angle loads. Now, an angle load sometimes feels better for a horse because it feels there's more room in it, so sometimes loading them in an angle sometimes in the initial stages makes them feel okay because it seems like a bigger space than a straight load. But an angle load doesn't offer a lot of space for the horses to stretch. They're kind of quite confined and their head's very close to the wall, so they can after a while feel quite stressed in an angle load, whereas a straight load in most cases has a bit more room between their head and the wall and they can stretch out a bit and there's not something right in their face. So, so a straight load for long distance travel is better because there's a little bit more room for the horse to stretch. Ideally, I believe travelling them in a backward fashion is better because people take off very carefully when they drive. Usually it's the braking pressure that's harder on the horses. So being able to brake and stabilise themselves through their hind feet is better than on their forehand. So, ideally if I had a wide float a truck, and if you see a lot of the trucking companies, some of them are travelling angled backwards. And I think a backward travelling float would be better for horses in the long run. But the biggest thing is just having a bit more space around them that they can sort of move and shift, and because they're not mice, they're not tunnel animals, they're sort of outside animals. So being in a confined space can be quite claustrophobic for a lot of horses. So the feeling of a bit more room usually makes them feel a lot better.
What about the size of the windows?
Yeah, I've had and this is I think a bit more light and open makes it feel a bit more outsideish than a dark closed up place. So a bit more, windows and stuff like that. Also, windows you can open for airflow are really good, because I see a lot of European style floats that, a hot day, if you're parked at the lights for a while, they'll get very, very hot and there's not enough airflow in them and the horses come out very hot. And the horses create a lot of heat inside there too. You imagine two big horses in a tight space, they create a lot of heat in there too. So you need windows and one for that light feeling, that open feeling, and also for airflow. I have had some people, though, that their horses actually, now I'm only going on what they've said, not my personal experiments, but that have said that they close their float off because they find the horses are getting a bit frightened when the trucks go past and behind them, and they actually, when it's closed like a little bubble, they tend to sort of cope a little bit better. So I have heard people say that. But I haven't done the experiment to work out if the horse is just in there, just kind of hiding. But, if your horse is freaking out every time a truck comes right up behind your float, and having the back door up so they can't see it helps them, then maybe that's better for them than freaking out with all the trucks and traffic on the road.
Okay, we'll go to Lisa's question now. So she has floated her horse in her friend's float that was for Frisians and Percheron side horses. Her gelding is only 14 hands, so heaps of room either side and behind. He walked on this straight load, no issues, and floated for well over a 3-hour drive. But a week later, refused to get on, and it took all day to get him on. So he was rearing and running back and kicking out. Then she hired a smaller float, and he didn't want to go on that, and it took 5 hours. She floated him back home, but now he's absolutely refusing to get on. So she's been told all sorts of different ways to force him on. They all seem a bit forced, and she's not too keen to go down that line. So she's wondering, what would your advice be to help with this horse, getting him on the floats?
Okay, so it's a very common thing what you've just said about he went on fine and then now he's not going on. Going in a float curiously for the first or second time or once or whatever, and feeling easy at loading because the horse is curious and maybe there's a bit of hay in the front. Who knows? The horse is not that claustrophobic, but it goes in the space quite easy. He goes, oh, this is all right. I can go in here. Easy, no problems at all. But the horse didn't recognise that it was a vibrating platform that it was going to have to stay in for so many hours until it was kind of like shell-shocked. So next time around, it's not going to go in. A lot of people load horses that are a bit uneducated or reasonably uneducated. They go in because they're curious, and then they go, no, this is not the deal. That's not what I signed up for. I just went into sort of this space, but you didn't tell me you were going to drive me for 2 hours and I was going to be locked in there for that long and frightened, so I'm not going to go in again. You've got to be very honest with your horses. So if your horse can lead really, really well, which it has to, you can't not load a horse, or you can't load a horse and not have it lead. Because the risk of a horse pulling back, flipping over, maybe the rope getting hung up, or maybe someone forgetting I've had so many people turn up at clinics and they're talking to me and I say, whoa, don't undo that breech and gate. You haven't untied your horse. Oh, crikey, sorry. But imagine if that horse did pull back and they were hard tied and then they bang, bang, bang their head, next minute they've got skull fractures. So the way I see it is, if you're going to start travelling horses, you have to have them educated, especially at leading, so they don't ever question the lead rope. So my rule of thumb is, if a horse pulls back and it knows how to pull back, then teach it not to pull back, teach it to lead amazingly. Then at least at the float, you can say to it, well, a backward thought's not available, but you can try learning to go into this float again. And if a horse does not pull back, it will lead forward. So when you get to the float, like I did this just at this clinic that I'm doing down in the Gippsland area of Victoria, I was jumping up and down inside the float, so much so that the car was vibrating as well, and I was banging the roof of the float with the flag as I loaded the horse, because the horse was pulling back and starting to want to pull back. I went outside, I worked on the pullback till the pullback was unavailable, and the horse was always coming forward with that rope. And then I get it to step on the ramp and back off the ramp a few times to make sure the horse was smooth and willing to come forward and test the float. And then I basically turn that float into a traumatic place, which the truth of the matter is it will be traumatic. and I made the float nearly worse than it would be when it's driving on an ordinary road. And I loaded the horse while the float was on full noise, so the horse could walk in softly backwards and forwards while that float was vibrating and banging and making all sorts of noises. So the horse knew what it was in for. And then the idea with that is if you turn the volume up so much when you load your horse, then when you drive off, you're turning the volume down, and the horse goes, "Oh, thank God for driving off. This is easy." But geez, I was a bit frightened going in there before because it was really scary and really bouncy and really noisy, but I did it and I could do it and I didn't hurt myself and I was able to move softly and process it. And now driving in this vibrating place is a bit easier. Whereas a lot of horses, like the naive one that went on, like in the question, the horse went on kind of curious, naive, but no caution. And that's the problem. A horse has to go on a float with proper caution, not just curiosity, because curiosity is what gets horses in trouble if they don't have caution. So if the horse knew how to lead amazingly and it went on knowing what it was going to be in for, then it wouldn't be like, "Oh, no, you've just lied to me. I don't like that place." Okay, so be very careful, everybody, that you don't just let your horses go in floats curiously and you go, "Oh, beauty, that was easy, lock them up, go for a drive," because you will fry them and make loading and accepting travelling harder later on.
So you go in quite a lot of detail to sort of prepare a horse for floating and all the leading and the different leading techniques, because it's not just getting a horse to follow a rope. It is actually more than that. That's all on your online videos, isn't it? Can you talk us through what you cover?
I cover basically leading, and there's also a video on all the little things I would look for in what a horse needs to understand before it goes on. It could be like yielding, even putting them in long range, just getting them to move in the long range is just a great thing for getting horses to move. Like my saying is, it's like two sumo wrestlers romantically dancing inside an elevator. The horse can move so gracefully around in such a tight space that there's no brace, no trouble, no anything. And if you do that in the long range, the horse gets really, really loose and able to move and have that feeling of boundaries and tight spaces. And yeah, so basically from the long reining videos to the float loading videos, there's the leading that's required, being able to sort of have a horse come up to a rail, tie up, stuff like that is all there for the loading, and then the process of getting the horse on and off the float. I will be adding shortly, there's something I've been thinking about a lot lately about the horses that have travelled, about the ones that freeze and scramble. They've got content on that. There's something I want to put up about another thing that you can do when a horse has started to load okay but travel bad, so there's things there as well. But yeah, there's plenty there. And to me, it's not about teaching the horse to load, it's preparing it to travel. That's the biggest thing. I think people I've watched float loading videos of different trainers and stuff, and it's all like, this is how you get your horse on a float. And I'm like, well, that didn't prepare the horse for travelling. That was just how you get a horse on a float. The travelling part of it will be the hardest part for your horse, and understanding how we can better prepare them for that is really important.
Okay. I'm going to move on to the next question, which is a little bit of a different one, but still to do with loading. It's from Nell from Australia. She said that she's learning a great deal from your podcast, and since she attended a clinic with you in Queensland a few months back with her grey gelding, she's had some amazing breakthroughs. Now she's transferring all of that through to her younger gelding. He is green and he's responding to your methods exceptionally well. He's now softly leading up and back, passing her, and goes smoothly in the side reins. He's happily handling the belly and the breeching ropes. And she's been blown away by how all these leading exercises are helping with the riding. However, she's having some issues with the float loading. So he's never been in a stable and he's only been on a float twice when he was much younger. And he showed quite a lot of anxiety in that small closed space. Now she's been going through your float loading videos that you've just mentioned and his leading, and she feels his leading is going well. He's improved quickly and he can now lead on the float with caution and softness. That's one of the tasks that you get people to do in your videos. But after going in the whole way and waiting with the tail bar still open, she can see his tension building up. And he'll go to nip if she places his hand under his chin when she asks him to go back out. Now, going on, he's fine with her hand there and asking him to go forwards and backwards. But she can see that anxiety is just building up to a pressure point when he's asked to wait. Going out, she's doing those backwards and forwards movements like you want people to do in your videos. But he won't calm until he's completely outside. So it seems like he's feeling cornered and resenting her hand is, as a sign of that tension building up, because normally he's absolutely loves being groomed and scratched all over, and he wouldn't have a problem with a hand there. So now it's wondering, how can she help him feel less cornered and less anxious when it's such a place of confinement?
So just at the last Mudgee clinic, a lady who's been working with me for quite a few years now with some tough horses that she's had a young one who's been a really frightened horse, and she's gone through the whole process that, he will not pull back and is very obedient to the rope, but she was really concerned that this trip to Myrtleford was, he was very nervous and quivering and frightened. And this is what I did with this horse, and this will be the same with your horse, I think, is give them the option of freedom of movement in the float. So what I do with them is, if a horse is kind of feeling constricted, so see, what you've done through very good leading is you can control the movement and the horse will load on, but they're feeling a bit trapped in there. And so what I do is I get the horses to be able to back off a visual, kind of even just a flag, like if they're a little worried, they're allowed to back away from that worry. So you do that outside. So you're actually going to teach the horse not to back up to the lead rope, but get a little concerned and feel it's okay to go out, move outside the horse float. So what I did with this particular horse, it sounds a bit counterproductive because you're telling the horse it's allowed to leave the float, but by being allowed to leave the float when it's anxious and not saying you're not allowed to and leading forward, because remember, we want a horse to instantly come forward when we pick up that rope, regardless of how it feels, because one day it'll save their life, okay? But if we don't choose to pick up the rope when the horse is choosing to unload, then it doesn't have to stop unloading. And I think what happens when we're loading, we sort of say backwards, forwards, and it's part of my technique to get a horse to go forwards and backwards on the way in and out all the time, so they're loading and unloading amazingly. But sometimes giving them the right to unload when they're nervous and not interrupt it is really important. So for this other little horse who was really quivery, we just loaded him and just rocked the float, waved a flag in front of him a little bit, and he went, "Oh, you don't like it in here, I just might back out." And he backed out. And then we just loaded him again and did it again until after a while he was backing out going, "Well, I'm backing out quite quietly and I'm not really worried so much anymore and I'm free to move and, I don't really need to back all the way out. I might just stop halfway and have a stand and not even worry about it." And so we worked on the transition of, you can choose to move out of this float if you like. I don't want you to stay in here all stressed. And then after choosing to back out, ticking it off their bucket list, coming back in, they knew safety was available outside. And then by going outside and then coming back in again, after a while, there was not a lot of difference between inside the float and outside the float. So that was giving them liberty while they're in the float. And they need that. And this is the one that helps the scrambling horses and stuff like that. They have the liberty to make a decision for themselves, and we're not going to interrupt them, okay, until they stop worrying. And over 50 transitions, it might take you 50 transitions, but you will find your horse start to process that environment a lot better because they have a freedom of thought and movement in there until eventually they're comfortable in there. But remember, everybody, there's still the fact that if you did pull on that rope, they come forward, because we can't just teach them to back up and then not come forward. So we still keep leading intact by not pulling on the rope when they're backing out.
What about claustrophobic horses? Do they ever get better with the claustrophobia?
Well, I don't know. I don't know a lot about claustrophobic people in a sense, because, I hear people in caves that are just terrified and they just can't get over it. And maybe there's some, smoke ceremony that they have to do or meditation thing they might have to do to get over it. So with people, I'm not sure. But I know with horses, the more we show them, expose them to certain things and get them to think through things and be able to sort of, the biggest thing with any claustrophobic horse or anything that's scary for horses, being able to sort of go in small doses and be able to sort of go somewhere safe. So basically, a lot of kids might be scared of a haunted house. And if suddenly they went into that haunted house trying to be brave, their mate said, "Why don't you go in first?" And one kid goes in, but then all of a sudden the door shuts behind them, they're going to panic. But if the door stays open and they go in and they come out and they go in a bit further and they come out, and then all of a sudden they've done a walk through the whole house and came out and said, "Oh, by the way, it's not haunted." It's having the door open so the horse can go in doses and then come back out to safety again and have that alloyed territory where it feels safe. And in those small doses of going in and coming out and doing that in lots of different places. And the other thing is for horses that are a bit worried about things around them and behind them and stuff, you're trying to also expose them to backing through tight spaces. So what I imagine, if you wanted a picture and what I'm seeing in my mind, when a horse is backing up using its eyes properly and backing correctly, it's like someone backing a trailer using the rear view mirrors. They're looking down the vehicle, down past their trailer, really processing what's coming up behind them. So when you back a horse, they use their rear view mirrors and they process things coming up behind them, going past them like that. And that's really, really good for horses too. So, claustrophobic horses, if you can put them forwards, backwards, and have all eye angles in all these different scenarios, whether it's stables or things like that, then they just get better and better at it.
Fantastic. Well, that's good to know. Next question, Mark, is from Anna, again from Australia. She'd like to know about a horse that's backing out of a float. She's done a bit of work with you, I think, at a recent clinic. She's done a lot of prep, but she's wanting to sort of prep with the backup. So she now wants to translate that back up so that she's able to stop her horse just by using her hand very lightly on his rump, so that she actually stops to light pressure. She's feeling that at the moment he's just walking through her still, although he's doing it slowly. Can you just give her some tips on how she can improve controlling her horse once he is in the backup mode coming out of a float?
Yep. So I spoke to Anna about this and she'd already tried it, but unfortunately she did mention that at one time, at the wrong time, someone put the breeching gate behind the horse, and the horse pushed through the breeching gate and backed out, and then realised that it can push through pressure behind it. So, because I did say to her, a really good thing, this is good for everybody, is back your horse up to the breeching gate when it's closed, or a rail, until it can touch the rail, and push it back until it pushes the rail. It has to be a strong rail, or the breeching gate has to be strong and a good solid one, until it goes, I can't push that. I can't push it. It's too strong. I can't do it. And then they realise that anything behind their rump that sits there like that could be a tree and they can't push it. So they don't even try to push it. And once you establish that in your horse's brain, when you put your hand behind them and touch them, they go, oh, there's a tree behind me, I can't back through it, because the first thing you put behind them was impervious. They couldn't push through it. So, but what's happened is the horse learned that the breeching gate behind it is something it can push and push back. The rail thing's not working anymore because the horse has associated it with a hand. I can push through a hand. So what I would go back to is teaching the horse to lead with a breeching rope. So you put a breeching rope or a butt rope, some people call it a butt rope, around its back end, and it's a long rope that goes around with a loop, and you just have it around its back end, and you spend a week teaching him to lead amazingly in a breeching rope. So you might back him up into the breeching pressure, back him with the halter into the breeching pressure, bring him forward with the breeching pressure until that live pressure behind him of the rope, he instantly thinks search forward, go forward, don't push through it. And if sometimes he tries to push into it, you might give it a bit of a two-handed, hey, you can't push through that, and he steps forward. Until if you've done a couple of weeks of it where the only thing he's thinking about is leading forward softly to a breeching rope. Then another thing I do when I'm long reining, and I know it's not advisable to tell everyone to stand right behind their horses, but once your horse, you can pick up their feet, they're safe. There's something I do is where I just put my hand behind them and I press on their butt, and I teach them to lead forward off my hands. It's really good for them, when you're behind them, to press and get them to think and lead forward softly. So just do a lot of leading from the butt, and you might just rejig his mind enough that next time you get to the float, he won't have that hand on butt, I'm going to go backwards.
I think there's been a lot of positive tips in there for people who are in the process of getting their horse ready to be loaded and taken somewhere and traveling to new places. So I hope that has been helpful to you. Don't forget, you can look into a lot more detail in all these areas by clicking on our online training videos with the 7-day free trial. We'd love to see you join the membership. Thanks so much, Mark. We'll see you again next week.
Thank you, Jenny, and thank you, everybody.
The accurate insights and solutions that Mark Langley gives are at the forefront of emotive horsemanship globally. You can learn them for yourself through his supportive online membership. Check it out with a 7-day free trial. marklangley.com.au